Welcome to the Business Success Navigators, brought to you by Empowering Business Inc. I'm Robyn Scobey, and today I have Ian. Ian, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, my name is Ian Hopfe. I'm a human resources and Indigenous relations consultant. And I work for myself, and I help a lot of my target market is kind of small businesses or businesses that work on the land, kind of like oil field drilling company or something like that.
Wonderful. So when you say you're an HR Indigenous, what does that really mean?
Well, with HR, I can do just about anything, right? Any sort of HR function that an organization might need, from hiring, firing, creating policies, um, creating training programs for your staff, things like that. That's kind of the wheelhouse of HR, or of course, along with the disciplinary and employee evaluations, things like that. But with Indigenous relations, it's a little bit different in that, I can come in and I can help the organization with it. It's almost like a cross between internal development and kind of an external development, because you're kind of changing the image of your organization a little bit. It's not just for internal learning for your employees, because as they learn that, it changes the outlook of the whole organization a little bit, and how they interact with Indigenous communities or Indigenous people or other Indigenous organizations.
So you're really saying it starts at the top down. Once management's kind of on board, it'll just flow down a little bit.
Quite a bit, because it's usually someone who's been assigned their EDI, their equity, diversity, and inclusion work that contacts me, or it's the owner themselves who contacts me. So it's someone who's been assigned to address this, or it's the owner identifying, saying, yeah, we need to kind of change and update how we operate. So, and it's easier with the buy-in at the high level if the owner or the managers are all on board. Then the rest of the organization will kind of accept it and learn the stuff, right?
Right. So when you say they need to change and make some step or some progress, what kind of steps would you suggest? And are they hard?
There's some low-hanging fruit that an organization can do, and it's really, these things, they're not really that hard. We start with something as simple as the traditional land acknowledgement, and the idea is we learn a little bit each time we do the land acknowledgement. So someone else, each meeting or each public event, someone different within the organization does the land acknowledgement. It can be nice and short, but a lot of times they've had to research the local Indigenous groups, and to pull out a little bit of history about them, because we could say, here in Edmonton, this used to be a meeting place of Indigenous people. That's why Fort Edmonton was built here, because the Indigenous people would come here themselves to trade, right? So having that land acknowledgement at meetings is important. It's an active role. You don't just say to your one Indigenous person in your organization, give us a land acknowledgement. The idea is that people are learning, right? And that land acknowledgement, a general one, can be put on your website, and that's almost an indication right there to Indigenous people that, oh, they're Indigenous friendly, right? Suddenly it starts changing the image of the organization. When I was emailing you, Robyn, at the bottom of my email is my personal land acknowledgement. And by personal, I mean it's based on where I work, my location. So you might have multiple different offices, your organization, or people working from home or whatnot. They would have a personal one on their email, and that would be going out to clients and partners and things like that. So it's another slight change. So your organization is going to seem a little bit more friendly. And, you know, bringing up policies like we're dedicated to hiring 5% Indigenous people. And that's because 5% of the Canadian population is Indigenous. So if your organization is aiming to get 5%, that's a big thing. That's a simple, easy thing to do also. Now, if you happen to have a field office or an office that's located someplace where the Indigenous population is a lot higher, then you could go ahead and hire, you know, 50% of your staff at that office are Indigenous people, right? So it's kind of, and that thing that one you just kind of roll into that, right? Slowly you're hiring more Indigenous people. That's not something that has to get done, but certainly the land acknowledgement, you could start it today, or, you know, throw it on the website, and all of a sudden there's a little bit of a change.
And what would
Right.
a sample land acknowledgement sound like? Like, does that where you have to know what treaty you're sitting on?
Yeah, you know, it really, excuse me, it really depends on your location. So when I do my land acknowledgement for downtown Edmonton, where I'm working and living, I acknowledge the Papaschase people. The Papaschase people were the people that lived right here. And I also acknowledge Treaty 6, because we're on Treaty 6 territory here in Edmonton. And then I also acknowledge the Métis Nation of Alberta, and depending on what zone I'm in, I'll say the Zone 4 Métis Nation of Alberta people, right? And that kind of covers it. But if you're in certain areas, I know if you're in Vancouver and in the Fraser Valley, there was multiple nations living really close to each other. So in that situation, you might want to acknowledge all the nations. And also in that territory, it was unceded territory. Unceded is a nice way of saying stolen, because there was no treaties at that time. So it really depends on your location. If you're in Ontario, you're dealing with, I think it was 5 or 6 nations, the dish with one spoon treaty, you know, between the nations. So they would each take turns using the resources in the area as Indigenous groups. So they had this agreement that they would take care of the territory, and only one nation each year would get to use the abundance. So then none of them would overhunt or overfish, or, you know, whatever they might be doing in that territory, right? So
And where would you find, if you didn't know, where would you go find what treaty you're on, or some, I know you can Google it, but you never always get the right information when you Google.
you know, the best resource I found was the Alberta Teachers Association treaty map. And it shows all the treaty areas, it shows all the Métis zones, and it also shows a dot on every First Nation and every Métis settlement in Alberta. But that's the best map I found, and that's the one I usually send to people or link to people, just because it's a great resource. So then, you know, you just look at the map and say, oh, I'm in Red Deer, so where's the closest First Nations, right? And then instead of saying Papaschase, now I'm saying, oh, I forgot the name of the, I want to say Sunchild, but you're able to grab that local First Nation, the closest one. And if there happens to be closer ones, you can do that, right? I know with Edmonton, a lot of people think that the Enoch First Nation is closest, but in fact, it's the Papastace people that live basically in the city proper at the time, right? So, yeah, the Alberta Teachers Association treaty map, that one, that's the one you gotta look for. So if you're looking for, you type in treaty areas, the one that says Alberta Teachers Association, it's great. Those teachers really put together a good map.
That's actually really nice to hear, because it would be great if our young people became more educated about Indigenous and the land that we now sit on.
Yeah.
So you said there was the easy step. So just putting it on our websites and doing some research as a business owner, attaching it to our signature on our emails, being aware of hiring and thinking about hiring different types of people as well.
Yeah.
Is there any other really easy steps that a business owner can take?
I think asking for help, searching for the help, right? That seems to be a situation you're not sure who you should be asking. And when it comes to protecting Indigenous knowledge, there's a lot of protocol behind that, and we don't know what the protocol is, right? If I'm a business owner and I'm thinking, oh, I want some Indigenous knowledge, first thing I might think of is, let's find an elder and go talk to them. Well, you've got to know how to approach that elder properly with the proper protocol. This can all be confusing. This can all be scary. It could go the wrong way. So, if you're not specifically looking for Indigenous relations consultant on the computer, go to your local friendship center. So they have all the connections. They'll know who to speak to. If you need someone to come in and do a beading workshop, they'll know the local elder who's an expert at beading, and making moccasins. So your local Native Friendship Center, that's where I always tell people, if you don't want to talk to me or I'm too far away from you, search for your local Native Friendship Center, and there's going to be resources there. So, and it's going to be a lot easier to go in there or phone there and say, hey, I want to start this journey. How can I do this? And they should have some sort of resources or be able to point you in some proper direction.
And I know for a lot of business owners, it's intimidating to go into the unknown. So if they're going into a friendship center, is there any protocols that they need to know when they're walking in?
Not at the friendship center. No, it's more of a place of learning. So they will have the beading class that's monthly. They'll have the moccasin making. They'll have these different. They'll have maybe a language instructor who comes in teaching the local Indigenous language. It's really more of a place of learning. So I would say don't be intimidated by it, but you can certainly give a phone call first before you walk in and ask, is there any protocol? What do I, and that seems to be something we're scared to ask. Just keep asking, how do I do this? And especially if you're trying to be an ally, it's how can I help? It's not, I'm going to help you. Right. So
Right.
just keep asking the questions, and a phone call is always a nice, safe way to say, hey, I want to come down and I need some help. What do I need to do?
That's some really wonderful advice. We always forget that we can just pick up a phone and call somebody. Because
Yeah.
we do. We all get behind our computers and we can think we know everything, and we absolutely don't.
Yeah. And it can be a big culture shock, right? Especially if you're thinking, well, I'm going to go to a powwow. Okay, well, you go to a powwow, there's thousands of people, hundreds and hundreds of dancers, and dozens of drum groups, and it's loud, and the costumes are amazing, but you're not sure, where can I sit? How, how do I interact with everybody and all that sort of stuff? That sort of environment is a big culture shock. But if you can pick up the phone call and say, hey, how should I act at the powwow? Or what can my organization do to be more supportive of the Indigenous groups, or even supporting the Friendship Center to start with, right? So, yeah, just pick up the phone and ask. Nobody's going to get mad at you if you're asking how to do this. Is there any protocol? What's the protocol? And the Indigenous people, they should be appreciative that, hey, this person phoned, and they're trying to learn, and that's great.
Right. So then you mentioned powwows. Is it okay for businesses to take their employees to a powwow? Or would that be something not really, you shouldn't be doing from an HR perspective? Like, if you really want to encourage your staff to be more inclusive.
Yeah, I would. Well, powwows are great. Dancing, music, costumes, the regalia is just amazing, right? Some people put a lot of work and effort and time into the regalia, right? It's a great place to be, but like I say, it could be a culture shock, right? It's a lot to take in. So I would almost say start with something a little more simple to introduce the idea of Indigenous people and their history and things like that, right? Something like the Kairos blanket exercise. If you could bring in a facilitator who can facilitate for 20 to 50 of your employees, this would give everybody that basic knowledge of Indigenous history and Indigenous people, so they can better understand, like, the importance of the powwow was to connect different communities and different nations, right? So that's where you would go to find your new wife, because she's from a different nation, so you're assured that you're not related to her, type thing, right? So just the importance of that, the importance of the dancing, and because the dances basically tell stories of different situations of the hunt, and things like that. So it's the Kairos blanket exercise and other Indigenous relations type workshops would, like an allyship workshop or something like that, would be a better starting place than saying, let's all get in a van and go down to the powwow. Don't get me wrong, everybody's welcome to the powwow. If you're an introverted person, you probably don't want to go. Extroverted people would just love it. There's a lot of people, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of vendors at the modern powwow, so you can see a lot of art and crafts and different types of Indigenous foods and things like that, right? So there's a lot going on at a powwow. So it might be easier to say, oh, let's not go all the way in. Let's teach a bit of history. Let's teach some understanding first. So with something like the Kairos blanket exercise.
And that people would just contact the Friendship Center to find somebody to help with the blanket exercise, or?
They might have some people, but then the Kairos facilitators are kind of a different group. They're not directly associated with the Friendship Center. Now, I know when I worked for Kairos, we did training, and we would train 5 to 10 employees from a a friendship center, and now they were certified to do the blanket exercise for their organization,
Okay.
right? So you could find a lot of facilitators, and of course, just getting a hold of me, if you're searching for me or my business name, the LBH Business Services in Google, it'll bring you to the Indigenous Relations page, and you could book me as a private facilitator for your organization.
That is wonderful, because I do think that is something to help bring awareness and to become educated. That is a huge part of the Truth and Reconciliation, is for the population to become educated on our past and what has happened.
Yeah, when you touch on Truth and Reconciliation, the 94 calls to action that they put out, each organization doesn't have to do 94. That sounds like a big number, but for, say, businesses, there's 4 or 5 of them that are addressed for business, and one of them is always an education component. Teach your staff and your management about Indigenous history, and that's exactly what the Kairos blanket exercise covers. So within your organization, it covers the education components for the 94 calls to action. So it's a nice quick way to say, check, we got one done, right? So, and you just kind of, I don't know, you do it once a year, so all the new staff and everyone gets a reminder yearly or something like that, right? And but it's a great way to cover that education. How do I educate my staff and my managers about Indigenous history? Right there. The Kairos blanket exercise, great starting point.
That seems so simple. All they have to do is contact you, and you can pretty much help facilitate and get everything into place. And yet a huge part of moving forward. I love
Yeah.
it.
And there is the Kairos blanket exercise, there is facilitators all over the country. And it's just, how do you get a hold of them? And unfortunately, Kairos themselves, when you contact them, I don't know, I'm hoping it's not permanent, but they've kind of shut down the KBE side of their business or their organization. So it's a little bit sad. So there's a lot of facilitators out there that could use a little bit of work. If you need a KBE in Vancouver, I know a facilitator in Vancouver, or she's close by Vancouver, right? So even if I can't get out there, I might be able to direct you to the local facilitator for something like that.
That's wonderful. We are almost out of time today, but I really recommend all of our guests to reach out to Ian here and get this blanket exercise and have it facilitated, and really educate your staff. And if you have any HR needs, he's also your man. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Robyn.